I still remember the first time I thought I had it all. It wasn't one moment exactly. It was a collection of moments that painted the picture of perfection. The way he smiled when he saw me, that effortless charm that made everyone around us like him instantly. The little gestures that made me feel noticed, seen, loved. I told myself, this is it. This is the one. Finally, someone who truly understands me. At first, it felt like a dream. Friends would comment on how good we looked together, how we seemed to fit like puzzle pieces, how our laughter echoed a kind of joy that everyone wanted to be near. Family members seemed pleased as if my happiness validated their belief that I'd finally found the right person. And for a while, I allowed myself to believe it, to bask in the warmth of being wanted, being admired, being loved. But deep down, there was a tiny voice, a whisper at the edge of my thoughts that made me pause. It was so soft, so easily dismissed that most days I ignored it. Something isn't right, it said, but I pushed it away. Who wants to listen to doubt when everything seems so perfect on the outside? Who wants to ruin a dream with suspicion? Not me. I wanted to believe in him. I needed to believe in him. Still, there were moments, small, almost imperceptible moments that made the heart tense, that made me wonder. He'd disappear for hours at a time, claiming work, errands, traffic, appointments. I'd ask casually where he'd been, and he'd smile, shrug, say nothing worth worrying about. But the way he handled his phone, that's what truly unsettled me. Always locked, always silent when I approached, messages disappearing like they never existed. I told myself I was imagining things. It's his primacy, I reasoned. It's normal for couples to have boundaries. Yet the unease lingered, like a faint echo that never quite leaves the room, that shadow at the edge of your vision that makes you turn your head again and again. It was there when he laughed a little too easily at his phone. It was there when he stepped abruptly, claiming, "I need some air," though we were in the middle of dinner. It was there in the tightness of his smile when I asked simple questions about his day. And then came the lies. The first ones were so tiny, so harmless, or so I convinced myself they were. "I was at work," he said, "but I knew the office lights were dark that night." "I forgot," he said, when he clearly remembered because something important had slipped out of our conversation later. Each lie was like a tiny crack in the wall of a house I had built inside my heart, a house I thought was solid, a house I thought was safe. I began to notice patterns, not out of suspicion at first, but because my instincts are rarely wrong. A weekend here, a dinner there, a meeting that conveniently conflicted with something I wanted to share. Each time he would smile, brush it off, and I would believe him, not wanting to cause a scene, not wanting to look paranoid. Love, I thought, was supposed to be trust, and if I questioned it too much, would I ruin what was good? Little by little, though, the pieces began to form a picture I didn't want to see. There were the sudden phone calls he stepped away to take, the subtle tension when he returned, the laughter that didn't reach his eyes. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe it was just a rough day. Maybe I was overthinking. But that tiny whisper inside me kept repeating, "Look closer, watch carefully. Don't ignore it this time." I think that whisper is what saved me. The part of me that never trusts until proof stands before me. The part of me that knows deep down, even when your heart refuses to admit it, when the perfect-looking world begins to crumble, it's better to see the cracks than to pretend they don't exist. And so I waited. I watched. I listened. All while smiling, all while nodding, all while pretending life was as perfect as it looked from the outside. But inside, I knew. I knew something was coming. something that would change everything, something that would turn the idea of perfection into a puzzle I'd have to solve piece by piece. Little did I know the first lie, the first disappearance, the first locked phone, they were just the opening acts of a story that would leave me shocked, heartbroken, and ultimately transformed. I leaned back on the couch, pretending to read, pretending to relax, pretending life was normal. But beneath that calm surface, the fire had already started. And by the time I realized it, the truth wouldn't just surprise me, it would shake the very foundation of the life I thought I had.
It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow creeping across the walls of a room you thought was bright. At first, it was just a text that didn't make sense, a message that seemed out of place, a word that felt strange coming from him. I brushed it off at first. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But then came the smiles. Smiles that didn't reach his eyes, smiles that felt rehearsed, forced, like he was performing a scene he didn't want anyone to notice. And then there was the way he looked at his phone whenever I entered the room. Not just a glance, a sudden sharp shift, as if he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. His movements became careful, calculated. I started noticing the way he straightened his posture, the way he cleared his throat or diverted his gaze, and every small gesture screamed secret. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things. Surely someone as kind, as loving, as attentive as him couldn't be hiding anything, right? But that small, persistent voice inside me wouldn't let me dismiss it. Every time he laughed a little too long at a message, every time he hid his phone behind his back, every time he paused before answering a simple question, suspicion gnawed at me, relentless and insistent. Patterns began to emerge. Weekends he claimed to be busy, sudden work trips or meetings that never seemed to end, anniversaries or simple dates that he forgot to mention until the last minute, small promises made and broken, each one seeming insignificant alone, but together forming a puzzle I couldn't ignore. Even the people around us began to shift. Friends who once smiled easily in my presence now avoided eye contact when I asked questions. The warmth of our social circle, the ease of laughter and shared moments was replaced by a tight tension that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. I remember one Saturday vividly. He told me he had a work engagement all afternoon. I didn't question it, at least not out loud, but as I scrolled through messages from friends later that evening, I noticed hints of something off. Subtle mentions of him being somewhere I wasn't, doing something he hadn't told me about. The unease in my stomach twisted tighter with every passing moment. I felt like a stranger in my own life, watching the person I loved act in a world I couldn't access. One evening, I decided to confront him, not with anger, not with accusations, but casually, gently. I wanted to understand, to give him the benefit of the doubt, to see if I was truly being paranoid. I remember standing in the kitchen, pretending to make a cup of tea, casually asking, "You've been spending a lot of time on your phone lately. Everything okay?" He laughed. That familiar, charming laugh, the one that used to make my heart flutter, now felt sharp, hollow. "You're imagining things," he said, brushing it off with a hand wave. That laughter, the ease with which he dismissed me, the way he made it seem like my concern was absurd, it hurt more than any truth could have. I wanted to demand answers, to shake him until he told me everything, but something held me back. Instead, I forced a smile, nodded, and pretended to let it go. But I didn't let it go. Not really. That laughter became a fuel, a spark that ignited a new determination in me. Curiosity, once casual and fleeting, transformed into resolve. I needed answers. Not because I wanted to ruin him, at least not yet, but because I had a right to know the truth. I had a right to understand what was happening in a life I thought was shared equally, a life I thought we were building together. From that moment on, I began to watch more closely. Every word he said, every gesture, every pause became data in a mental catalog I kept silently observing. I noticed a slight change in his tone when certain names were mentioned, the way his smile would falter for a split second, just enough to register if you were paying attention. The sudden excuses that had no real reason behind them. All of these little cracks, when pieced together, painted a story that my heart didn't want to believe, but my mind could no longer ignore. Sleep became difficult. My thoughts churned endlessly, questioning, replaying, analyzing. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering every little inconsistency, every diverted glance, every unexplained absence. Sometimes I would catch myself imagining scenarios that made my stomach knot. Scenarios I didn't want to exist, but couldn't dismiss. And yet, despite the gnawing anxiety, there was a strange clarity forming. I was beginning to see the outlines of a truth that had been carefully hidden from me. It wasn't just the behavior that bothered me. It was the secrecy. The way he compartmentalized his life. The way he acted as if nothing I saw mattered. The way he assumed my trust could be taken for granted. That realization was heavier than anything else. I understood, finally, that suspicion was not a flaw in me. It was a signal, a warning light flashing in red, telling me to pay attention. And I paid attention. I began to collect evidence, not maliciously, not obsessively, but methodically. Notes in my phone about where he went, what he said, who he was with. Observations about patterns in behavior, odd coincidences that seemed too consistent to be accidental. I didn't confront him again, not yet, but I built a quiet, steady awareness of everything around me. Every day I sharpened my perception, learning to see the little details that others might overlook. The more I watched, the more I realized how carefully he had orchestrated his lies. It wasn't clumsy or careless, it was deliberate, subtle, designed to make me doubt myself if I questioned it. And yet, for all his cunning, he had underestimated me. That persistent whisper in the back of my mind, the one I had nearly ignored, kept me alert, kept me steady, kept me prepared for what would come next. There were moments, of course, when I doubted myself. Maybe I was reading too much into harmless actions. Maybe I was letting jealousy cloud my judgment. But even then, a single detail, a fleeting expression, an unusual hesitation, a familiar pattern repeating would snap me back into clarity. I was not imagining things. Something was wrong, something significant, something that could no longer be ignored. And so, my patience became my weapon. My careful observation became my shield. I waited for the right moment, the undeniable proof, the truth that could no longer be denied. Curiosity had grown into determination. Determination had grown into resolve. And by the time the revelation arrived, the first undeniable betrayal, I would be ready. I wanted to believe love could withstand anything, but I also knew that truth cannot be hidden forever. Secrets have a way of revealing themselves. Cracks always widen, and lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually come undone. That knowledge gave me both fear and strength. Fear of what I might find. Strength in knowing I could face it when the time came. By the end of those weeks of quiet observation, I had learned more about him than I ever wanted to know. I had learned how he manipulated, how he deflected, how he smiled while hiding things. And I had learned something about myself. I could endure uncertainty. I could gather evidence without losing myself prematurely. I could prepare for truth without letting it destroy me. Suspicion had grown quietly, steadily, like a vine climbing up the walls of my heart. At first, it was just a whisper, then a murmur, then a persistent voice I could no longer ignore. And even though I didn't know the full extent of his betrayal, I knew I would find it, and when I did, I would be ready. I wasn't just curious anymore. I wasn't just anxious or uneasy. I was determined. Determined to see the truth, to confront it when it revealed itself, and to finally understand the man I thought I loved. Because deep down I knew, There was nothing more dangerous than a person who has been quietly observing, quietly waiting, quietly learning. And by the time the betrayal came, I would be waiting, fully aware, fully prepared.
The day I discovered the truth, my world didn't just break, it collapsed. There are moments in life that divide time into before and after. That day was mine. It began like any other. Quiet morning light slipping through the curtains, the faint sound of the city outside, the routine of coffee brewing. Nothing unusual. I remember even feeling a strange calm that day, as if the universe was silently preparing me for what I was about to uncover. He had left early, saying he had a meeting. The words felt ordinary, but the tone was rehearsed. I'd learned by then to hear the difference. My intuition had grown sharper from weeks of suspicion, from nights spent piecing together fragments of half-truths. When his phone buzzed on the table, the one he usually guarded like a secret, I froze. He must have forgotten it in his rush. For a moment, I stared at it, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct told me, don't look. Every ounce of curiosity screamed, now or never. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was locked, of course, but my mind was sharper than my fear. I remembered a small detail, the way his fingers moved when he entered his password once. It wasn't clear, but it was enough. 3 tries. On the third, it opened. And that's when my world stopped spinning. The messages weren't violent or explicit. They didn't need to be. They were worse. Hundreds of conversations, months of communication, sweet words, plans, promises, words I thought were mine to hear, words that had once made me feel special. He had been lying, not just to me, but to everyone. To our friends, to our families, to anyone who believed in the illusion of us. At first, I couldn't breathe. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the air had been drained out. My fingers scrolled, but my mind couldn't keep up. I saw my name mentioned, mocked, twisted, used in jokes. I saw messages about the times he told me he was busy, working late, too tired. Each one matched perfectly with the nights I'd waited for him to come home. The deceit was detailed, layered, choreographed, plans made with someone else, dinners that never happened with me, little gifts, secret meetups, inside jokes that once belonged to us. It wasn't a random mistake. It was a double life. The person on the other end wasn't a stranger either. No, she was someone I knew. Someone who had been in our home, who had smiled at me, who had asked about our relationship as if she genuinely cared. My hands went cold. My breath hitched. It felt like betrayal multiplied by betrayal. A shared secret between 2 people I had trusted, 2 people who had looked me in the eye and chosen deception over honesty. Shock, anger, sadness, they didn't come one after another. They came together, crashing over me like a wave that didn't stop pulling me under. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry until my body was empty. I wanted to run so far away that I'd forget the sound of his voice. But most of all, I wanted something deeper. I wanted justice. Not revenge. Not yet. Justice. Validation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right, that the endless nights of doubt had meaning. I remember sitting there for hours, scrolling, reading, piecing together timelines like a detective who never asked to take the case. Every lie matched an excuse. Every absence matched a text. It was all there, laid out before me, the full story of a life I never knew I was sharing with someone else. He had built two versions of himself. One for me, loving, reliable, trustworthy, and another for her, thrilling, adventurous, secretive. The cruelest part, he made both of us feel special. That realization hurt more than anything. It wasn't just about love. It was about power, control, the ability to manipulate hearts like pieces on a chessboard and walk away smiling. I closed the phone, but the images burned into my mind. I walked to the window and stared outside, the world still moving as if nothing had changed. Cars passed, birds flew, people laughed somewhere in the distance. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was. I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside and erased everything that once made sense. And yet, beneath that hollowness, a quiet spark flickered. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't hate. It was clarity. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and I saw it for what it was. Ugly, painful, undeniable. That night, he came home as if nothing had happened. Same smile, same casual tone, same mask. I watched him, truly watched him for the first time. Every gesture, every word, every lie wrapped in charm. He had no idea the truth was already sitting quietly between us, heavy as stone. He asked me how my day was. I smiled. It was fine, I said. My voice didn't shake, my eyes didn't reveal the storm behind them. He talked about his meeting, about work stress, about things that didn't matter anymore. And as I listened, I realized something that changed everything. He believed I would never find out. He thought he had me perfectly controlled. The loyal one, the forgiving one, the one too emotional to see through the act. In that moment, I stopped being the victim. I didn't tell him what I knew. Not yet. Instead, I observed him like a scientist studies a subject, calmly, patiently. Every lie he spoke became proof. Every word he twisted became a note in my mental ledger. The betrayal had been revealed, but instead of destroying me, it woke something inside me, something sharper, stronger. I saw him not as the man I loved, but as the manipulator he really was, a performer who believed his charm could mask the truth forever. He thought control was love. He thought lying was protection. He thought he could play with my heart and walk away untouched. But now, I knew, and knowing meant power. As the days passed, I acted normal. I laughed at his jokes. I played my role. But inside, I was rebuilding, piece by piece, a new version of myself. A version that would not break. A version that would not beg. A version that would eventually make him face every lie he had ever told. Betrayal changes people. Some collapse under it. Some rebuild themselves from it. And some, like me, become silent observers, patient strategists, waiting for the perfect moment when truth becomes undeniable. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I realized the meaning of real power. It isn't shouting, it isn't breaking things. It isn't begging for apologies that will never come. Power is knowledge. Power is silence before the storm. Power is knowing the truth and waiting calmly, deliberately for the perfect time to use it. He had taken my trust. He had played with my heart. But in doing so, he had given me a far more dangerous thing: awareness. And awareness is the beginning of justice. I turned my head to look at him, asleep, peaceful, unaware that his double life was no longer hidden. I whispered quietly, not for him to hear, but for myself. This isn't over. Because it wasn't. The betrayal had been revealed. And from that moment forward, everything would change.
I knew I couldn't confront him immediately. Chaos would be what he wanted, a messy, loud scene where emotion overruled truth and everyone would walk away confused, sympathetic to the latter voice. That was his playbook: charm, deflect, rewrite the story. I refused to hand him that victory. So I did the opposite. I became quiet. I became patient. I planned. The first thing I did was admit to myself that this was no longer about proving I was right to others. It was about protecting my own peace and taking back control of a life someone else had thought he could manage from behind closed doors. I needed evidence, not for revenge's sake, but so the truth could not be argued away. Evidence ends rumors. Evidence ends excuses. Evidence makes the invisible visible. I started small and methodical. I made notes in my phone: dates, times, excuses, small inconsistencies. I took screenshots, discreetly, legally, with a steady hand, of messages and details that matched the nights he'd promised to be working late. I saved receipts and checked calendars, matching locations to the stories he'd spun. If he said he'd been at a client dinner, I called the venue later and asked about the event. If he said the car had broken down, I checked service records. Nothing was left to memory alone. Observation became my radar. I watched him the way someone studies an animal: when it moves, when it freezes, what makes it seek shelter. He had rituals. He checked his hair just before opening the door. He cleared his throat when nervous. He always left his left cuff unbuttoned when he left in a hurry. I cataloged these little things. They wouldn't seem important to anyone else, but they were clues. He was most reckless when he thought I was distracted, when I laughed at a joke or accepted an apology too quickly. So I stopped being too quick to forgive. I let things sit. I let them reveal themselves. I also learned to listen differently. People who lie often tell more stories than necessary to cover the gaps. He became verbose when he felt cornered, offering up details that added up poorly. I learned to ask questions that required specifics: names, dates, exact places. Vague answers were red flags. When he answered precisely, that was sometimes worse, because it meant he'd rehearsed the lie. I kept my tone casual and my face neutral. Anger is obvious. Curiosity is not. Curiosity probes. Curiosity uncovers. There was a part of me that feared becoming cold, turning my grief into a spreadsheet. But then I realized strategy isn't heartless, it's careful. My anger had to be useful. Every small deception he told would be the fuel for a plan that exposed him without making me into the villain. I wasn't out for humiliation. I was out for closure and truth. Allies mattered. I reached out quietly to people I trusted, friends who had been close enough to notice changes and who weren't likely to take his side automatically. Some had already suspected, some had been told half-truths, some were shocked. I didn't ask them to pick sides. I only asked for honesty and memory. Do you remember when he said, or
Where were you the night he said he was at the meeting? Sometimes people's recollections added a piece I'd missed. Sometimes they confirmed what my gut had already known. I also watched his patterns with people who were beyond my immediate circle, coworkers, acquaintances, others who had casual access. Social media became a map. Photos that didn't match stories, check-ins that contradicted work obligations, and comments that hinted at a life running parallel to mine. I didn't post or lash out. I mapped dates, locations, relationships. If he was building a narrative, I was building its opposite, a record. Practicalities mattered too. If this was going to be more than catharsis, it had to be precise and safe. I backed up everything in multiple places, cloud, external drives, with timestamps where possible. Secrets hide in chaos. Evidence survives order. I made sure my method couldn't be accused of fabrication. The truth has to be airtight if it's going to break through charmed defenses. There were nights I nearly lost myself to rage. I would replay messages until my hands shook, imagine confronting him and watching him crumble. Those fantasies are a kind of quick comfort, but they're also dangerous. He wanted drama, and drama dissolves credibility. So instead of acting, I channeled that energy into creating an irrefutable story. I wrote down how I wanted the reveal to feel: calm, undeniable, with witnesses who couldn't be gaslight. I rehearsed it, not in anger, but in clarity. A reveal is a performance too, but one performed by truth. Then I tested him, not cruelly, but cleverly. A subtle question here, an unexpected mention there, just to watch the reaction. The way he shifted, lied, diverted his gaze. Small confirmations that my map was correct. Once I left a nonchalant note about an event I thought he had attended alone, then watched social media later that evening to see who was tagging him. The breadcrumb trail he left was accidental and perfectly damning. Timing is everything. I didn't want a rushed exposure that made me look unhinged, or a delayed one that let him manipulate more people. I wanted a point where enough truth existed to force a reckoning, where friends, family, or even his own reputation would hold him accountable without turning the spotlight into a pity play for him. I aimed for a moment when the contrast between his performance and the evidence would be too great to deny. remember the night so vividly that even now, the smallest details are burned into my memory. The low hum of the restaurant's soft jazz music, the flickering candlelight reflecting off glasses of wine, the laughter of friends that filled the room before everything changed. It was a Friday evening, the kind of evening he would normally charm his way through with practiced smiles and clever jokes. I had chosen the place carefully, somewhere familiar enough to make him feel safe, yet intimate enough for every word to carry weight. I wanted witnesses, not for spectacle, but for truth. The people present were friends we both knew well, people who had once believed in our story as much as I had. He arrived right on time, confident as ever, his smile wide, his demeanor effortless. That same false confidence that had once drawn me in now looked hollow, performative, like a man rehearsing a role he no longer understood. "Wow," he said with that practiced grin, sliding into the seat across from me. "You look beautiful tonight." I smiled softly. "Thank you. It's been a while since we've all had a night like this, hasn't it?" He nodded, glancing around at our friends, unaware that each of them had been quietly briefed, not about every detail, but enough to know something important was about to happen. They didn't know exactly what, and that was intentional. I wanted their reactions to be real. The evening began pleasantly enough. Small talk, light jokes. He told stories, exaggerated as always, feeding off the attention in the room. I played along, laughing where appropriate, my heart pounding beneath the surface calm. Every minute that passed, every word he spoke, was the countdown to a truth he didn't know was waiting for him. And then, halfway through dinner, when the plates had been cleared and the atmosphere was comfortably warm, I leaned forward. "I've been meaning to ask you something," I said quietly. He looked at me, his tone light but wary. "Oh, what's that?" I smiled gently. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" The laughter around the table paused. The shift in tone was subtle, but everyone felt it. He blinked confused. "Pretending?" "Yes," I said. "Pretending to be honest, pretending to care, pretending that all those lies wouldn't one day find their way back to you." For a moment, his charm faltered. I don't know what you mean," he said, trying to laugh it off, his eyes darting briefly to our friends. I reached into my bag and placed a small folder on the table. Nothing dramatic, just calm, deliberate movement. I said, "You should. You've spent months writing this story. I just finally decided to read it." He froze. Slowly, I opened the folder and slid a few printed screenshots across the table. Messages, dates, names, plans. The kind of evidence that doesn't need an explanation. The room went still. He stared down at the pages, his fingers twitching slightly as he realized what he was looking at. "Where did you—" I interrupted softly. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that I finally know." His face lost color. The mask cracked. That perfect, composed expression fell into something raw and exposed. Our friends around us shifted in their seats, their confusion turning to realization. A few of them gasped softly as they recognized names, dates, even phrases they remembered hearing secondhand. He tried to speak, to reclaim control, but the words tangled in his throat. He stammered, "This isn't what it looks like. You're taking things out of context." "Really?" I asked calmly. "So the part where you told her you wished I'd just stop asking questions? Was that out of context? Or when you promised her you'd leave me once things settled down?" Silence. Every lie he had crafted was now laid bare, not through shouting or drama, but through the quiet, piercing weight of evidence. I had become the mirror he couldn't escape. He looked around the table, searching for sympathy, but the faces that had once laughed at his jokes now looked at him differently, not with hatred, but with disappointment. It was worse. Disappointment is a wound that doesn't heal easily. He murmured finally, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You have to believe me." I took a slow breath, steady and even. "That's the thing," I said. "Belief is something you earn. You spent so much time teaching me to doubt myself that you forgot. Trust is a two-way street." He leaned forward desperately, whispering now, "Please don't do this here, not in front of everyone." "I'm not doing anything," I replied, my tone still calm. "I'm just telling the truth. You chose the lies. You built them. I just stopped carrying them for you." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. You could feel the air thicken, the realization settling in. For once, he wasn't the one holding the narrative. He tried one last time to twist it, an instinct, not strategy. "You could have just talked to me privately," he said bitterly. "I did, for months. You called it paranoia. You called it insecurity. You laughed every time I asked for honesty. So now, I'm done asking." There was no rage in my voice, no trembling, just calm finality, the kind that comes when pain finally meets peace. He sat back, eyes darting from me to the evidence again. His hands shook slightly, his expression hollow. He muttered something under his breath, an apology maybe, or just another attempt at damage control, but it didn't matter anymore. One of our friends, a mutual acquaintance who had always admired him, spoke quietly. "I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "You had everyone fooled." He looked up at her, desperate. "You don't understand." "No," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I think we do." It was done. I looked at him one last time, really looked. The man I thought I knew, the person I had loved, and the stranger who sat across from me now. There was no satisfaction in watching him crumble, only clarity. He wasn't powerful anymore. The illusion had finally broken. "I'm not here to embarrass you," I said quietly, standing up. "I'm here to end this. You don't get to rewrite the story anymore." And with that, I gathered the folder, left a small envelope, the legal side of our separation already prepared, and walked toward the door. Behind me, the silence was heavy, broken only by a low murmur as someone whispered, "She knew everything." As I stepped outside, the night air felt different, sharp, alive. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of suspicion pressing on my chest. The lights of the city shimmered, distant and calm, and I realized the power had shifted completely. He had taken my trust, my laughter, and my peace. But in exposing him, I had taken back something far more valuable, myself. It wasn't triumph in the loud, cinematic sense. It was quieter, like the closing of a door, the final page of a painful chapter. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. I had my truth, and that was enough. As I walked away, my phone buzzed, a message from one of the friends who had been there. "You handled that with more grace than anyone could have. You didn't destroy him. You just let the truth do it for you." I smiled. That was exactly what I wanted. No shouting, no revenge spectacle, just truth. Calm, undeniable, and permanent. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Because in that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting someone back. It's about taking back your story and walking away with your head held high while they're left to live with the silence of their own lies. After that night, everything shifted. Quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the air after a storm. Nothing looked different on the surface, but everything felt changed.
The tension that had once been invisible between us had dissolved, leaving behind a strange calm that was both liberating and heavy. I had ended the lie, and with it, the illusion. Word spread quickly. It always does. In our social circle, whispers replaced laughter. Awkward silences replaced inside jokes. People who had once celebrated our relationship now didn't quite know how to act around either of us. Some sent me kind messages, short and hesitant. I heard what happened. I'm sorry. Others avoided me altogether, uncomfortable with the truth that had been laid bare. Truth has a way of making people uncomfortable, especially when it forces them to confront their own complicity and ignoring what was always there. He, on the other hand, reacted exactly as I expected, trying to rewrite the story again, but this time without much success. He played the victim, hinting that I had overreacted, that I had embarrassed him publicly, but what he couldn't understand was that I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. The friends who had seen the confrontation that night couldn't unsee it. The cracks in his mask were too deep to repair. At first, I tried to stay quiet. I didn't want to be defined by his betrayal. But silence, I learned, is its own kind of statement. While he scrambled to repair his image, I chose to move differently, with calm, measured distance. I stopped explaining myself, stopped apologizing for the truth, and stopped participating in his version of events. Still, the fallout wasn't easy. Betrayal leaves behind more than heartbreak. It leaves a mess, a tangled web of emotions, loyalties, and unfinished conversations. Some friends asked uncomfortable questions. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Others expressed guilt. I noticed something was off, but I didn't want to interfere. I didn't blame them. People often prefer comfort over truth, even when the truth is quietly destroying someone right in front of them. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing how much of myself I had sacrificed trying to protect an illusion. For so long, I had excused the lies, softened the red flags, and convinced myself that love was about forgiveness, even when it came at the cost of my own peace. That realization stung more than any betrayal could. But it was also the beginning of something important: self-respect, reborn from ruin. There were days when anger still found me. Not loud, fiery anger, but the quiet kind that sits behind the ribs, a mix of disappointment and disbelief. I'd see his name pop up somewhere, hear a song that reminded me of the past, or receive a message from someone asking, "Are you really okay?" And every time I'd remind myself that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding why it happened and choosing not to let it define you. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding, not in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate acts of peace. Morning walks replaced restless nights. Journaling replaced endless questioning. I spent time with people who didn't ask for explanations, who just sat beside me in silence when words felt heavy. Slowly, the noise faded. He, meanwhile, faced his own unraveling. His reputation dimmed, not because I destroyed it, but because truth quietly erodes lies over time. The people who once defended him began to see the pattern for themselves. The inconsistencies, the deflections, the subtle manipulations. They didn't need me to say a word. Truth, once revealed, has a way of echoing long after the confrontation ends. One evening, a mutual friend called. "He's been trying to make amends," she said cautiously. "He says he misses you, that he wants to talk." I paused before answering. Misses me or misses the control he lost? She went quiet.
That silence told me everything. Because that's what betrayal really is. Not just an act of dishonesty, but a hunger for control. It's about someone deciding that their comfort matters more than your peace. Once I understood that, I no longer needed an apology to move forward. Some apologies are just tools to reset the same manipulation. I didn't need closure from him. I had already given it to myself. The social divide remained for a while. Some people stayed loyal to him out of habit. Others distanced themselves from both of us to avoid taking sides. But I didn't mind. The older version of me, the one desperate to be understood, would have tried to defend her story to everyone. The new version of me simply didn't care who believed it. Truth doesn't require consensus. Months passed. Life began to take on a quieter rhythm. I started finding joy in ordinary things again, cooking, long drives, reading books I'd ignored for years. It's strange how betrayal sharpens your awareness of small blessings. Every honest conversation felt precious. Every act of kindness carried meaning. I began to value stillness, authenticity, and my own company in ways I never had before. One afternoon, I ran into one of our old friends, someone who had been at that dinner. She looked hesitant at first, unsure how to approach me. Then she smiled and said, "You know, I think what you did that night, it woke a lot of us up. We always thought he was untouchable." Her words stayed with me. I hadn't planned to wake anyone up. I just wanted peace. But perhaps that's the irony. When you stand for your truth quietly, it shakes more people than any argument ever could. He eventually moved away, or maybe just faded into a different crowd. I didn't keep track. I didn't need to. My story with him ended the moment I walked out of that restaurant. Everything after that was just aftermath. Still, I sometimes think about the version of me that loved him, the one who believed in his promises, who saw the best in him even when the truth was begging to be noticed. I don't hate her. I admire her in a way. She believed in love deeply enough to risk pain. But now I know better. Love without honesty is just illusion wearing perfume. It looks beautiful, but eventually it fades. And what's left behind is the scent of something that never was. The fallout taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's just the decision to get up again, to face the day with a steady heart, even when the world feels unsteady. People still ask, would you ever forgive him? My answer is always the same. I already have. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting their weight go. I don't carry the anger anymore. It doesn't serve me. What remains is a quiet kind of wisdom, a reminder that betrayal can break you, but it can also refine you. In time, the whispers stopped. The pity turned into respect. People began to see that my calm wasn't weakness. It was peace, hard-earned. And as the months rolled by, I realized I had built something stronger than revenge could ever offer: self-trust. Life didn't go back to how it was before. It became something better, clearer, more real. I learned to choose people who didn't need proof of my worth, to value actions over promises, to listen to intuition when it whispers, something isn't right. Betrayal had tested me, but it hadn't defined me. It had shaped me into someone who no longer mistook chaos for passion or charm for love. I had walked through the storm and come out with a steadier soul. And so whenever I look back on that night, the dinner, the reveal, the silence that followed, I don't see pain anymore. I see transformation. I see a woman who stopped chasing closure and became it. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't exposure or retribution. It's peace. It's walking away with your integrity intact, knowing you didn't have to destroy someone to reclaim yourself. He lost my trust, but I found my truth. And that's the kind of ending no betrayal can ever take away.
Betrayal leaves an invisible mark on your soul. It separates who you were before from who you become after. For a long time, I believed that pain would always define me, that every moment moving forward would carry its shadow. But as time passed, I began to understand something deeper. Betrayal doesn't define you, it refines you. In the beginning, I wanted revenge the way people usually imagine it. I wanted him to feel what I felt, the humiliation, the shock, the cold realization that the person you trust most can still destroy your peace. But as the noise faded and my emotions began to quiet, I realized that true revenge doesn't come from hurting someone else. It comes from transforming yourself so completely that their actions no longer hold power over you. When everything was finally over, I spent weeks thinking about what had really happened. I thought about him, yes, but mostly I thought about me, about the times I ignored my instincts, the moments I gave too many chances, the excuses I made in the name of love. We like to believe that patience and forgiveness make us noble, but sometimes they only make us blind. There's a difference between being loyal and betraying yourself, and I had crossed that line more than once. The hardest part of betrayal isn't the lie itself. It's realizing how much of yourself you silenced to avoid seeing it. I used to think intuition was paranoia, that trust meant ignoring my doubts and hoping for the best. But now I know that real trust isn't blind, it's awareness. It's choosing love only when it's grounded in honesty, not illusions. He had distracted me with charm, with attention that felt like devotion, but was really just control. And when you love someone deeply, it's easy to mistake emotional chaos for passion. But real love doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't make you feel smaller. It doesn't demand your silence. Love that thrives on lies is never love, it's manipulation. Once I understood that, I stopped asking why he did what he did. His betrayal was never about me. It was about his emptiness, his need to feed an ego that could never be satisfied. He lied because truth requires courage, and that's something he never had. That realization was freeing. It allowed me to separate his actions from my identity. I wasn't broken because he deceived me. He deceived me because he was already broken inside. That understanding gave me peace. I realized that calmed patience is more powerful than anger. When I was quiet, watching, documenting, waiting, I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Anger burns fast and leaves ashes behind. Patience, though, creates precision. If I had reacted impulsively, he would have turned it against me. But by staying calm, I controlled the ending. Truth, when delivered quietly, speaks louder than any shout. Composure became my armor. It was my way of reclaiming control. When you refuse to let someone's lies dictate your emotions, you take back your power. They expect you to fall apart, to scream, to chase. But when you stand still, when you face them with unshakable calm, it terrifies them more than anything else. That's real power. And in the end, exposing the truth wasn't about punishment. It was about liberation. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to remove the mask. Once I did that, everything false fell apart on its own. The truth has no need to shout. It simply exists. That night, when I revealed everything, I wasn't just confronting him. I was confronting every version of myself that had been too afraid to see the truth. In the silence that followed, I realized something beautiful. Freedom doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it comes quietly in the moment you stop doubting yourself. That night was my freedom. Not because I had hurt him, but because I had finally stopped betraying myself. As the weeks passed, I began to see that sometimes life removes people from your path for a reason. It doesn't always feel fair, but not everyone is meant to walk beside you forever. Some are just there to teach you what you need to learn before the next chapter begins. Painful lessons, yes, but necessary ones. And now looking back, I can say with complete honesty, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal itself, but for what it forced me to become. It stripped me of everything false and left only what was real. My strength, my clarity, my self-respect. It showed me I could stand alone and not only survive, but thrive. If I could go back and speak to the version of myself who first felt something was wrong, I'd tell her, don't silence your instincts just to keep the peace. If it feels wrong, it probably is. Trust yourself. Your heart knows what your fear won't admit. And to anyone walking through that same pain right now, wondering how to breathe when trust has been shattered, I'd say this, you will heal. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you will. Healing isn't pretending it didn't happen. It's accepting that it did and choosing to grow anyway. Don't rush it. Don't seek revenge that costs your peace. The best revenge you can ever have is living in such a way that their memory no longer has power over you. Healing isn't a straight line. Some days will feel heavy. Memories will resurface when you least expect them. But with time, they'll stop hurting and start reminding you of how far you've come. You'll realize that what once broke you actually built you. Betrayal changes you, but it doesn't have to harden you. It can soften you in the right places, make you wiser, more selective, more peaceful. It can teach you that not everyone deserves your loyalty, and not every love story deserves a happy ending. Some people are just chapters, not lifetimes. Looking back now, I see that his betrayal didn't destroy me, it redirected me. It helped me redefine what victory really means. It's not revenge or reputation, it's peace. It's walking away without bitterness. It's knowing you did the right thing, even when it hurt. Yes, he was exposed, but I was transformed, and that transformation is worth more than any form of revenge could ever be. Justice doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it simply means truth. Sometimes it means finding light in a place you once thought you'd never escape. Betrayal was not my ending. It was my awakening. It showed me that even when everything falls apart, you still remain whole. That truth, no matter how painful, is lighter than any lie. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Betrayal is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your power. It's the moment you reclaim your dignity, your strength, and your voice. The truest revenge isn't in making someone else suffer. It's in becoming untouchably at peace. When their memory no longer stirs your emotions, when you can look back and smile without bitterness, that's when you know you've won. Because in the end, I didn't just survive betrayal, I conquered it.